Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. And if you enjoy this fanfic, then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic.
Kurenai Yuhi had had the reputation as the Ice Queen of the Hidden Leaf for almost 20 years now. Regarded as cold, aloof and standoffish to most, she radiated a mystery woman aura to those who did not know her well, or who could not see through the mask she wore that gave her the Ice Queen moniker. In the last 3.5 years, however, she had become much colder and more distant, and what was once a mask had started to become her true personality. Before, even when she wore the mask, one could see the warmth that was her true nature in her eyes if they looked closely enough. Ever since the war, though, the warmth had vanished, leaving eyes that were cold. It hadn't happened right away, but the loss of her lover Asuma, and her miscarriage, combined with the pressures of fighting on the front lines in the Fourth Great Shinobi War, which had by far been the most brutal, devastating and horrific conflict in the elemental nations to date. All of these things together had seemingly broken her heart. Life itself seemed to be fogged over in a grayish haze for Kurenai these days. It was bland, the emotions that she did feel simply weren't that rich, in either a good or a bad way. Sadness was simply a sigh, happiness didn't seem to come, and anger was nothing more than a rolling of the eyes and a focus of her attention onto something else. Her heart simply didn't feel that much, except on this day. It was January 4th, the anniversary of Asuma Sarutobi's death. Kurenai always found this day to be very hard, even though it had been 4 years since he had been killed by Hidan of Akatsuki, she still couldn't completely let go or move on. Reminded not only of Asuma, but also of the child that she had miscarried during Pain's attack before Naruto had gotten there to fight him off. This was always the worst day of the year for her, and yet, she couldn't bring herself to do anything except immerse herself in thoughts and memories of her lost love, and grieve over her lost child. In a way, she was grateful for this ritual and day. Even though the feelings were largely negative, she was thankful that she could actually feel something, anything at all, even if it was nothing but grief, hurt and sadness. She was on her way to the cemetery to visit Asuma's gravesite, having just bought a fresh bouquet of flowers from the Yamanaka flower shop. While there, she and Ino didn't say much to each other. Ino understood what significance today held for Kurenai. Ino herself was always a bit melancholy on this day of the year as well. Even though she had been able to mourn properly and move forward, she still missed her old sensei. Kurenai was thankful that Ino had simply offered her a small smile, given her a hug and quickly made the floral arrangement for her to take to Asuma's grave. Ino always gave Kurenai a discount on this day, a small encouragement for which Kurenai was thankful. This year's winter was colder than usual. Even though as a ninja, the cold didn't affect her quite as severely as it would a civilian, she still couldn't help but take notice. She thought that the cold in the air resembled the cold, empty feeling that had been in her heart since her Asuma had been taken from her. As she closed in on the Hidden Leaf Cemetery, she began to feel an even colder breeze. She could also smell it in the air. It was going to rain, yet another appropriate metaphor for the tears she knew she would soon be shedding as she entered the cemetery through the cast iron front gate. As she made her way towards Asuma's tombstone, she began to worry in the back of her mind about her current state of dress. She was wearing her typical bandage-style dress with a single red sleeve and black shinobi sandals, forehead protector, also in black, around her forehead. Even though she was on leave today, she knew that as a Junin of the Hidden Leaf, she could be called in for a mission at any moment should the need arise, so it was always prudent to be prepared when out and about. Not knowing if she'd have the emotional strength to come back to this place if she left now to get some rain gear, she decided that she would simply endure what would undoubtedly be a very cold rain while going through this yearly ritual of remembrance. When she had found Asuma's grave, she laid the bouquet in front of the stone, lowered herself to her knees and sat on her heels, and simply placed her hand on the name engraved in the marble grave marker. She began to shed her own first tears as the first raindrops began to fall. As the rainfall progressed into a steady drizzle, to a thunder shower, and then into a full downpour, Kurenai's own tear flow would match it. First a few tears here and there, into steady shedding of tears, eventually turning into silent, body-racking sobs as she dropped her hands to the ground to support her upper body's weight, hanging her head and clenching her eyes closed. This was always a very hard day for her. 20-year-old Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze had just left the Hokage's office after reporting back in from routine border patrol. 1 month out in the wild had really given him a craving for Ichiraku ramen, and he decided that it was time to indulge that craving. It had started to rain about an hour or so beforehand, the perfect weather in which to enjoy a piping hot bowl of broth and noodly goodness. He found himself thankful that he had put weather-resistant seals into his crimson with black flames sage cloak. In addition, he had also placed seals into the cloak that would warm his body and dry him off if he activated them, each of the seals with their own chakra storage seals so that the cloak could perform this task without him having to concentrate on it. Naruto had to admit that the last several years had been good to him. His 3-year training trip with Jiraiya he would call the best years of his life. His growth as a shinobi, and as a person had been absolutely staggering during this period. Jiraiya had not only helped Naruto with his education and training, but he had also taught him 2 other important lessons: espionage and intelligence gathering, and the importance of having sources of income other than ninja missions, which could always dry up during periods of peace and low activity. Not even Tsunade knew that Jiraiya had shown Naruto how to build his own spy network and develop his own methods of gathering intel. Jiraiya had also taught him how to invest in and build businesses while living the lifestyle of a shinobi. Naruto was now intensely grateful for the investment lessons that he received, as he now owned several highly successful businesses that made him rather wealthy. His gratitude was increased by the fact that since the war ended, ninja were not in as high demand as they were when things were a little more tense between the nations. Missions weren't as plentiful anymore, and even high-level Junin had to take what they could get, which was mostly C ranks with the occasional B rank mission thrown in. A- ranks were few and far between, and S ranks were almost unheard of anywhere these days. Naruto, having plenty of money, told Tsunade of his business ventures, letting her know that he didn't need missions to make ends meet, and that the other shinobi should get his share of the missions. This, of course, did not excuse him from his annual shift of border patrol, or from clients asking for him specifically, although this rarely happened as Naruto's services went at a premium. He was one of two S-rank ninja in the village at the present time, the other, of course, being Tsunade, and of the two, Naruto was by far the stronger. It wouldn't be long now before Naruto would be named Hokage, and he was currently being trained by Tsunade for the position, which he would officially receive within a year's time. Naruto found himself reflecting on his relation to the village that was his home over the years. He had started as the village pariah, the child whose existence nobody even wanted to acknowledge. Icy stares and whispers are what he received as a kid. Most times, he would be kicked out of stores, or overcharged for goods, many store owners making it clear that he wasn't welcome in their store. Of course, the pranks that he used to pull didn't exactly help his case, either, but he only turned to mischief because people didn't acknowledge his existence in the first place. He simply created an environment in which he would be impossible to ignore. Things got better once he became a shinobi. It took a while, but people started to look at him differently when they watched his performance in his first Chunin exam. He had begun to earn the respect of his peers and their senseis when he defeated Kiba Inuzuka in the final exam preliminary round. He began to earn the respect of the rest of the village when he defeated Neji Hyuga in the finals. He was respected even more so once word began to spread about his defeat of Gaara in his full Shukaku transformation, and more still when the story was told that it was he who brought Tsunade back to the village to be the fifth Hokage. Respect had turned into hero worship when he had defeated Pain and saved the village. His loved it at first, but it began to get old fairly quickly, particularly when he began to notice certain things. Everyone now wanted to be his new best friend, which of course he didn't mind, being that he could befriend just about anyone anyway. It was when girls and even some women who hadn't even given him the time of day, or had even been cruel to him before all of this, all of a sudden became fangirls of his that he started to see how shallow hero worship was. He was made even more aware of the shallowness of the village as a whole when people who had ignored him, or even kicked him out of their stores or called him cruel names as a kid began to come up to him as though it had never happened, and they would tell him things like, "I always knew you were a great kid." The hero worship and fangirl problem became even worse when he was given a field promotion from Genin straight to Elite Junin during the war, and his heritage became public knowledge. When the village learned that Naruto, now considered one of their two greatest heroes, was in fact the son of Minato Namikaze, the other of their two greatest heroes, they responded with thunderous applause and wild cheering. This continued hero worship had, of course, increased even more after he had destroyed Madara and Sasuke Uchiha, ending the Fourth Great Shinobi War and bringing about final victory for the Shinobi Alliance. Even through all of this, the village itself had acted as though they had never done Naruto any wrong in his lifetime. He never received a single apology for any abuse or cruelty that he'd had to endure as a child, and even up to his mid-teenage years, while Naruto was very forgiving, it bothered him that the village seemed to be rather averse to taking ownership of and responsibility for its wrongdoings. Even amongst the shinobi that he was close to and worked with in the Leaf, there were very few that truly knew him. Among the civilian populace, the Ichirakus were the only people that did. They had been the only ones who had been able to see through not only Naruto's label as the demon boy, but through the mask he used to wear to keep himself shielded from the pain that he felt as a child from the isolation that was forced upon him. They had been the one constant throughout the years. He knew that he could always count on the two of them if he needed a place to go, even just to take the mask off for a while. If he was grateful for anyone in his life, it was definitely old man Tuki and his big sister figure Ayame. Among his comrades, Shikamaru was probably the only person in his age group that truly knew Naruto well, and that was only because he was able to make very astute observations that others missed. Of course, when he confronted Naruto about this, Naruto freely opened up and admitted to him that the only reason that he never shared real things about himself before was because, with the exception of Konohamaru and Iruka, and by extension Hanabi and Anko, nobody ever asked. The Ichirakus, of course, didn't have to ask, as he never hid anything from them anyway. He had simply accepted the fact that people simply weren't interested in getting to know him. They thought they already had him figured out, whether he was the demon boy or the village hero. People had an idea of him, and in all the years his peers knew him, none of them had bothered to try to find out who he really was, and that's what irked him most of all. This truly was a shallow village he lived in, but it was his home, and he loved it all the same. He would protect it until his dying breath. This line of thinking helped him to turn his thoughts to those people that made the village his home more than anyone else. Konohamaru, of course, knew Naruto as well as Shikamaru did, because he had actually taken an interest in his surrogate big brother's life. Konohamaru had been dating Hanabi Hyuga for a little while now, and Hiyashi, seeing a way to get Hanabi out of having to brand her with the caged bird seal, spoke with the two of them, letting them know his thoughts and, with the approval of both Konohamaru and Hanabi, setting up an official betrothal contract for the two. They were to be married by April of next year. This, of course, caused Naruto to get to know Hanabi a lot better, as they were with him at his house quite a bit, and Hanabi came to see Naruto as a big brother herself. Iruka, of course, always took an interest in his surrogate little brother's life, and when Iruka had started seeing Anko Mitarashi, she began to get to know a completely different Naruto than she had previously thought him to be. She became a big sister figure to him as well, also spending a lot of time in each other's homes, as Naruto had them over quite a bit, and once they were married and they had bought their own house, they had Naruto over quite a bit as well. Naruto couldn't help but think back to Iruka's and Anko's wedding. Naruto was the best man, and Kurenai Yuhi was the maid of honor. Naruto was all smiles that day for one of his most cherished loved ones, but he remembered that Kurenai's smile seemed to be rather forced, as though she were genuinely happy for Anko, but was remembering something that was quite painful for her. They had both made some small talk during the wedding reception, and he could tell that the woman was grateful that he was doing what he could to take her mind off of whatever it was that was bothering her. He made an educated guess that she was thinking of what her life would be like had Asuma lived and they had married, but he wisely decided not to broach the topic with her. As he walked by the cemetery on his way to his favorite eating establishment in town, he was broken out of his musings when he overheard a few men talking amongst themselves. "Boy, I wouldn't mind getting me a piece of that," said the first one with a leer. Yeah, she's a hottie, alright, I'd like to bang that, myself, said a second one, with a smirk to the first one. Said a third, drooling at the object of their perverted thoughts. Naruto stopped for a moment and cast a glance in the direction that the men were looking, and saw the back of a woman. He recognized the bandaged dress and black-brown hair of the woman who had just taken center stage in his musings, one Kurenai Yuhi, kneeling in front of a gravestone with her head hung down and shoulders slumped, shivering, her body shaking up and down every now and again in what appeared to be sobs. Even from here, Naruto could tell that she was soaked to the bone, and would likely end up getting sick if she didn't cover up or take shelter soon. He hadn't really seen Kurenai in a while, or interacted with her much, but seeing her in the state that he presumed she was in, he felt compelled to try to offer some form of assistance to her. Noting his own compulsion, Naruto found himself getting irritated that these men were simply leering at her, not even noticing her emotional distress or physical discomfort, and began to walk in the direction of the cemetery's front gate, which happened to be where these men were standing. As Naruto approached, the men noticed him, smiled and greeted him like he was their best friend, as had become commonplace in Naruto's experience. Naruto simply smiled and nodded curtly, not stopping to talk to them, and entered the cemetery, not noticing that the men had decided to move on when he left. His expression changed to one of concern as he walked over to Kurenai, who was indeed shivering and sobbing, seemingly lost in her own world. Naruto removed his cloak and draped it over her shoulders as he walked around to the front of her. Kurenai opened her eyes as she felt the cloak drape over her body. She slowly looked up, her eyes taking in a pair of brown low-top leather lace-up boots and bleached blue loose-fit jeans, coming up to a crimson long-sleeve pullover shirt under a black Junin vest, and finally resting upon a mop of spiky blonde hair, and sparkling blue eyes on a tanned, chiseled face adorned with 3 whisker-like marks on each cheek. Recognizing Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, she blinked a couple of times as those beautiful cerulean blues looked at her with great concern, seemingly wishing that they could ease her pain or even take it away completely. As he saw her swollen, puffy cheeks and ruby-red eyes made crimson from being bloodshot with tears, he offered a sad smile, which for some reason caused her to begin crying even harder than she had been, but this time, the sobs were loud, she couldn't hold them back anymore. Kurenai leaned forward, sobbing loudly into Naruto's shirt, her arms grasping at his Junin vest. She eased into him even more as Naruto's arms simply wrapped around her, his right hand gently holding the back of her head through her hair, his left hand gently rubbing up and down her back as she cried into him, releasing everything she was feeling. After a few moments, she eased into him even further, wrapping her arms around his body, clinging to him, continuing to sob into his chest, Naruto continuing to rub her back and keeping his hand in her hair. While doing this, he made shushing noises to calm her, and spoke softly, reassuring her that he would remain with her for as long as it took to let all of her grief out. After a few minutes of this, by the time Kurenai had cried herself out, she pulled back from him, regaining her composure before looking up at him and giving him a grateful smile. "Thank you, Naruto," she said quietly, her voice somewhat hoarse from sobbing. "You're quite welcome," he responded with a warm smile of his own. She smiled at his thoughtfulness, causing him to respond, Kurenai, do you want me to give you some space for a while? At this, Kurenai took a moment to collect her thoughts enough to respond to him as she said, thank you, again with a grateful smile. Naruto released his hold on her, Kurenai doing the same. He said to her, the cloak is weather resistant, and it has seals in it that will warm you up and dry you off, before putting his right hand into a half-ram sign, touching the cloak with his left hand and whispering, dry heat seal, release. Kurenai noticed that she immediately became warmer, and was also beginning to dry off, even the parts of her that were not covered in the cloak. She looked at Naruto, again with gratitude, and a bit of wonder mixed in. Naruto began to walk away while saying, take as much time as you want, okay? I'll wait for you by the front entrance. As he left her to finish her visitation, she found that she felt strangely lighter than she had felt in quite a while. She had never grieved or wailed that loudly, even when she had learned of Asuma's death or upon learning that she had miscarried, and she found that it had felt great to get it all out of her system. Years of pent-up grief and anguish had been released into Naruto's warm, comforting embrace, and she couldn't help but wonder how it was that this hadn't happened until now. She spent a few more minutes at Asuma's gravesite, privately thanking Asuma for sending Naruto her way. She had somehow imagined that it was Asuma who sent Naruto to try to comfort her, and then got up, heading towards the front entrance. She saw Naruto standing there, simply waiting patiently, allowing himself to get soaked in the downpour as she was now warm and dry in his sage cloak. He smiled as he saw her walking towards him, and she couldn't help but feel a sense of wonder at this young, handsome, and now rather tall, man before her. She began to think back to the last time she had seen him, which was at Anko's and Aruka's wedding. She could tell that he had noticed how she was feeling at that time, and at the wedding reception, he had seemingly made it his personal mission to make sure that it would be a fun and happy affair for her as well as for the bride and groom. It meant a lot to her that he was so considerate at that time. He was at least a good 6 to 7 inches taller. He had to be at least 6 feet 3 inches to her 5 feet 9. His hair was in the same style as his father's, spiky blonde up top, extending down to the bottom of his neck. As his face had matured, he resembled his father more and more. In fact, many had thought that he was the spitting image of his father, taking away the whisker marks. It was also easy to see that he had matured mentally and emotionally in the past 4 or so years since coming back from his training trip with Jiraiya. His voice sounded close to his father's as she remembered it, but Naruto's timbre was slightly lower. She also noticed a spark of wisdom and intelligence in his piercing gaze, along with sadness and pain, indicating that he had matured beyond his years, and that his maturation had not been easy. As she pondered this, she realized that in all the time she had known him, that she really didn't know him. All she knew were what the public already knew, as well as what the rumor mill spread. Naruto brought her out of her reverie as he asked, all set? Kurenai smiled and nodded, responding, yes, thank you for loaning me your cloak, Naruto, as she began to remove it to return to him. Naruto walked up to her and placed his hands over her own, gently pulling the cloak closed once again on her slim, lithe form. She looked up at him in confusion, to which he responded with a smile. Kurenai, I will not allow a lady to be soaked in the rain, or made to be uncomfortable if it's within my power to prevent it. At this, her confused frown became a surprised smile as she simply responded with a light blush, well, thank you, Naruto. Not at all, responded Naruto with a warm chuckle. He continued, so where can I escort you to? As they walked out of the cemetery and began to follow the road, Naruto walking alongside Kurenai, letting her dictate their direction. Well, I was just going to head back home, Kurenai admitted. Please, lead the way, said Naruto graciously. As they were walking, Kurenai's face began to pull itself into a happy smile. She began to talk to Naruto, so where are you coming from, Naruto? I just left from reporting into Grandma Tsunade after returning from border patrol. Kurenai frowned in distaste at this. Ugh, you must be glad to be back. Yeah, I really am, replied Naruto, agreement with her own distaste for the drab assignment evident in his own tone, but I don't have to go again for a whole year, so that's kinda nice. What about you? Any interesting missions, yourself, lately? No, not really, just typical run-of-the-mill assignments, like escort duty, bandit elimination, things like that. Most of my duties lately have actually consisted of training and researching new genjutsu. Naruto's interest seemed to peak at this, really. Have you come up with anything yet? Kurenai shrugged. Nothing really, yet, but I think I may be on track to using a modified version of the second Hokage's Infinite Darkness Jutsu. She finished with a little excitement. Ever since the miscarriage, she had thrown herself into her work, which was now her primary source of stimulation and fulfillment, if it could be called that. Naruto raised an eyebrow. Really? Why modified? Well, I've found that my chakra reserves and control are at about their peaks in balance right now. The problem is that I can't seem to increase my control any more than I have, and when I try to increase my reserves, my control starts to suffer, and I currently don't have enough chakra to effectively perform the original jutsu, hence the need to modify. Naruto looked down at the road in front of him as he hummed in thought, then turned to Kurenai, not slowing his leisurely gait. That's a rather interesting problem to have. I don't think I've ever heard of anyone running into that particular issue. In theory, there should be no plateau like that. What chakra exercises have you been using to increase your control and reserves? Kurenai responded, the standard ones: leaf balancing, tree and water walking, kunai and senbon balancing, any combination thereof. Those are really the only ones that I know, and they're also the only ones of needed for fine-tuned control. Naruto continued to ponder the issue that he had heard. He seemed to know something about her problem, but he couldn't put his finger on it. He knew it would come to him in time, so he decided to tell Kurenai that he would look into her issue. Kurenai, Naruto began as Kurenai turned her gaze to him once more. Something about the issue you're facing doesn't seem, well, normal to be honest. Let me do a little research on what might cause this kind of problem, and I'll see if I can't help you find a better solution than having to modify jutsu to suit that limitation, okay? Kurenai's eyes brightened as she nodded, intrigued and excited at the possibility of making a breakthrough in her overall level of ability and skill. Silence reigned for a few moments, becoming somewhat uncomfortable, at least for Kurenai. She decided to break the silence. You know, Naruto, I can't help but think about Anko and Aruka's wedding, and how, well, you were quite observant of my mental and emotional state that day. I never did tell you just how thankful I was that you helped me, just to enjoy myself that day. Upon hearing this, Naruto smiled and responded in a tone belying genuine curiosity, "You're welcome, but what brings that to mind?" "Actually, the fact that you've done it yet again just now," responded Kurenai, as she lowered her head, feeling both thankful towards Naruto, but at the same time, hurt and angry that nobody else had done anything beforehand. "I had been at Asuma's gravesite for over an hour when you showed up, and nobody cared enough to try to help me. I overheard the comments of those men when they were ogling me, but you came over and seemed to know exactly what it was I needed. I guess, seeing this and experiencing this from you, it makes me realize that I really don't know you as well as I might have thought I did." You're right. I don't really know you that well, either. What do you say we remedy that?" Almost immediately, Kurenai's stomach began to growl, causing her to blush. Naruto, not missing a beat, raised an eyebrow and added with a chuckle, "Over lunch, maybe." Kurenai gave a small smile in mild embarrassment, nodding in agreement with Naruto's suggestion. Naruto asked, "So, got a tasting for anything?" Kurenai thought a little before responding, "Not really, but I wouldn't mind some hot soup, this is good weather for it." Naruto responded in turn, "I like the way you think, how does ramen sound?" Kurenai gave another small smile and nodded. Naruto responded, "To Ichiraku's, then." After a few moments of walking, they arrived at their destination, and entered through the front flaps, immediately attacked by the heavenly smell that the little stand always emitted. Ayame Ichiraku turned around and saw the stand's #1 customer, greeting him warmly, "Welcome back, Naruto. It's been too quiet without you here." "Hey there, Ayame," said Naruto, giving her his famous foxy grin, "How are ya?" Same old, same old. "One sec," she responded, as she turned around and yelled towards the back of the stand, "Dad, Naruto's back." Tsuki Ichiraku came back out of the stock room, grinning upon seeing his favorite customer. "Hey, Naruto. It's great to see you again, son." And with company, no less, he added with an amused, playful smile. "You too, Tsuki, and yes, I believe you know Kurenai Yuhi." "Why, yes, I do. What can I get for the two of you?" Naruto looked at Kurenai with raised eyebrows, allowing her to order first. Kurenai looked at Naruto, seeing his expression, and turned back to Tsuki to place her order. "I'll have a large seafood ramen, extra shrimp and fish cakes, please." Naruto then placed his own order. "I'll have a Naruto special to start, old man." Tsuki smiled knowingly, coming up. Kurenai looked at Naruto with a single raised questioning eyebrow. Naruto special?" Naruto grinned somewhat sheepishly as he responded, "Yeah, extra large bowl of miso ramen with 2 boiled eggs, double barbecued pork, fish cakes, beef, chicken, sprouts and a lobster claw. I order it so much that we just made a name for it." He added with a chuckle, I personally think Tuki should just add it as a menu item, but he has yet to take that leap. Kurenai giggled in response to this, giving a slightly larger half smile. Fair enough, maybe we can create a Kurenai special today, She finished with a warm laugh. Naruto brought his hand to his chin in an exaggeratedly thoughtful gesture, with an equally exaggeratedly thoughtful frown. And what would be in the Kurenai special? Naruto turns to Kurenai, hands in front of him, palms facing outward and down, gesturing to imaginary ingredients on the counter as he begins his lecture on how to construct a special ramen dish. Okay, we have to start with a base, at which Kurenai began to engage in some interplay, responding, okay, so you mean we start with a broth or stock? Naruto smiled as he began some interplay of his own, correct? The Naruto special, for example, has a base of miso and beef broth. So, what would the Kurenai special's base be? Responded Kurenai, as she looked off in an exaggeratedly thoughtful expression of her own, and responding after a few moments, I believe that a shrimp, lobster or even a vegetable base would best suit the Kurenai special. At this, Naruto took on a genuinely thoughtful expression, as though trying to envision how a mix of these might taste. I wonder, what about a mix of shrimp and vegetable stock? Kurenai wore a bemused smirk as she responded, that actually sounds pretty good. Naruto, still in thought, added, I must admit I also find myself wondering what shrimp broth and miso might taste like together. Both of their musings were interrupted by the soft clink of a small platter being placed on the counter by none other than Tuki. On the platter were 6 small sample-sized cups of broth, separated into pairs, which caused Naruto and Kurenai to both raise an eyebrow in confusion at the ramen chef. Tuki answered the unspoken question with a smirk, well, since you're both wondering how certain combinations might taste mixed together, I thought I'd let you actually taste them. He pointed to each pair of sample cups as he identified them, shrimp and miso, shrimp and vegetable, and for laughs, shrimp, vegetable and miso. He looked back up at them, so, taste each and let me know what you think. Naruto and Kurenai both picked up their respective cups of shrimp and miso first. Naruto knocked it back, swishing it around in his mouth to get a good feel for the flavor before swallowing. Kurenai sipped hers a little more slowly, smacking her tongue against her palate in order to help her concentrate on the flavor. Both Kurenai and Naruto nodded in approval at the combination, and they tasted the other 2 samples in the same method. When they were done, Kurenai spoke her mind. I believe that the shrimp and vegetable base would best suit the Kurenai special, as the miso, while very good, overpowers the other 2. I envision the Kurenai special with a lighter flavor. At this, Naruto and Tuki nodded in approval of her judgment. Naruto continued with the lesson. Excellent. Okay, we have the base, and of course, the noodles go without saying, but how about the toppings? Kurenai answered without missing a beat, shrimp, lots and lots of shrimp. And then fish cakes, scallops, crab legs, a lobster claw, some bean sprouts, and a bay leaf as a garnish. Naruto raised a curious eyebrow. Kurenai continued after catching her breath, looking at Naruto dead in the eye while wagging a finger in emphasis, and presentation of the dish is very important in the Kurenai special. The dish must be a work of art, perfectly symmetrical. The lobster claw should stand against the left side of the bowl, and the crab legs should line the remaining edge. The bottoms of the crab legs should be surrounded by the shrimp in a wraparound fashion. The fish cakes and bean sprouts should be in the middle of the bowl, and the scallops, Kurenai raised her finger to her chin and glanced upward in thought, finishing with, the scallops should be underneath the noodles as a sort of pleasant surprise, so to speak, and the bay leaf should be dead center of the bowl. Kurenai smiled and nodded in satisfaction as she finished, not having noticed that Chuki had gone back into the kitchen to start on the orders. Naruto nodded back, turned his head towards the kitchen and shouted, "Hey Teuchi! Did you get all that? Let's have a Kurenai special, in place of Kurenai's previous order." "I got it all, son. 2 Kurenai specials, coming right up." Kurenai's eyes went wide with surprise as Naruto gave her a wink and a thumbs up. She wasn't actually going to order the dish, she was only having a little spontaneous fun with her present companion, but the more she thought about it, the more appetizing her creation seemed to become. She smiled in pleasant surprise at this realization, but then she realized what Chuki had said. She turned to Naruto with yet another raised eyebrow, too. Naruto explained, "Well, if it's a new dish, I have to try it, too." Kind of an unspoken rule at Ichiraku's. Naruto must try all new dishes. Kurenai laughed at this and responded, "Then, of course, we must follow the house rules." Naruto laughed with her as he continued, "And then, of course, we'll have to think of a Naruto and Kurenai special." At which both of them cracked up. Chuki interrupted them as he brought their orders. One Kurenai special for Kurenai, and a Kurenai special and a Naruto special for Naruto. He gave both of his current patrons an amused smirk. "Well, you two, before you go off the deep end in creating additional menu selections for me, why don't you go ahead and enjoy what you ordered?" Both Naruto and Kurenai grinned rather sheepishly at this. Naruto found Kurenai's face to be quite adorable with a sheepish expression on it. Kurenai noticed his thoughtfully amused smirk and asked, "What is it?" Naruto responded, "I don't think I've ever seen you wear a sheepish expression before." Kurenai seemed to think about this, and responded, I guess we're both a little surprised today, because I've never engaged in such witty banter with you, before." Naruto nodded at this. Very true, but for now, as he turned to his bowl of ramen and broke his chopsticks, saying, "Down the hatch." As he began to eat his ramen, Kurenai doing the same. Kurenai, of course, knew of Naruto's ramen fetish, but had heard from several of her friends and her former students that he would usually inhale his ramen, and that it was quite a sight to see. To see him eating his food with perfect table manners was another surprise. She raised an eyebrow at this, and Naruto seemed to know what she was thinking, as his response would indicate, "If you're wondering why I'm not wolfing it down, it's because it would be unfitting and impolite to do so in the presence of a lady," he finished with a smile. Kurenai smiled at Naruto's indirect compliment. As the pair ate their meal, they began to make conversation. Naruto started, "So Kurenai, tell me a little bit about yourself." Kurenai responded, "Okay, What would you like to know? I guess we can start with the basics. Likes, dislikes, hobbies, interests, dreams, stuff like that. Genin team style introductions, huh? Okay then. Well, as you know, I'm a genjutsu mistress. I like learning about and training in new types of genjutsu. I also like roses, shochu, one vodka and octopus with wasabi, spending time with friends, being pampered and treated like a lady. She nodded at Naruto while she said this, letting him know that she acknowledged his gentlemanly treatment of her on this day. Curling up with a good book in front of a warm fire, relaxing in spas and hot springs, fine dining, and flowery and spicy scents. I dislike cake, perverts, barbaric men and people who make hasty judgments or conclusions without first gathering all the facts. Naruto smiled at this as Kurenai continued, my hobbies are having evening drinks with friends, reading good romance and mystery novels, and cooking. Naruto's expression molded itself into an intrigued smirk with a single raised eyebrow as he heard this, but he didn't interrupt her as she continued. My interests include genjutsu training and research, learning new and interesting ways to cook, and learning about shochus and vodkas of various kinds and flavors. My dream is to be the world's most renowned genjutsu mistress, and I would say that my immediate goal for the time being, which you have just given to me, is to try to overcome the plateau that I've found myself on concerning the balance between my chakra control and reserves. She took a breath as she finished, then asked, so what about you, Naruto? Well, I like music. At this, Kurenai found herself rather shocked, raising both eyebrows and looking intently at him while he continued, various types of food, including but not limited to, ramen, sushi, any kind of meat that's grilled, roasted or stewed, and even dango. My favorite ninja art is fuinjutsu. Kurenai found herself surprised yet again. I also like taijutsu, kenjutsu and ninjutsu. I love to learn anything new, especially any new skills that I can get my hands on. My favorite jutsu to use is my shadow clone jutsu because of the way in which I learn anything my clones learn, which allows me to learn and master any new skills I wish to learn very quickly. I like shogi, go and any other game of strategy. I love physical training. I also like relaxing in a good hot spring. My dislikes are perverts, fangirls, at which he involuntarily shuddered before continuing, people who make hasty judgments about others, being hit by people simply because they're annoyed, cowards and traitors. Kurenai noticed Naruto's eyes darken just a bit as he said the last two, but allowed him to continue. My hobbies are learning any new skills that I might find useful and putting them to use, training my mind and body, calligraphy, it helps with my sealing, singing and playing various musical instruments. At this, Kurenai couldn't help but interrupt, really? She said, surprise evident in both her tone and expression. Naruto smiled, it's true. I was actually born with perfect pitch, and I had taken up singing to start with as a kid. I didn't start to learn how to play instruments until a couple of years ago, though. Kurenai smiled, both intrigued and excited about this new discovery she had just been given as she responded, you'll have to sing for me, sometime, then. Naruto gave an embarrassed chuckle. We'll see, he responded before continuing, now, where was I? Ah, yes. Some of the skills I've picked up are gardening, architecture, carpentry and construction. Kurenai's eyes grew wider and wider as he continued listing off several of his hobbies: cooking, interior design, basic tailoring, and blacksmithing. My interests are researching and developing new seals for my fuinjutsu, learning various fighting styles to add to my own, whether kenjutsu or taijutsu, finding new and more effective ways to break or counter genjutsu, which is actually something of a little project that I'm working on, one that I wouldn't mind your help with. Now that I think about it, Kurenai nodded in understanding as he continued, and learning the various political, economic and social aspects and goings-on within the village and the land of fire. My dreams. Naruto paused to close his eyes and sigh, and then continued in a more subdued tone of voice. My dreams are to be the world's greatest sealmaster, to be Hokage, so that I can help build a better world than we currently live in, and to hopefully find that special someone and start a family with her, he finished with a smile. Kurenai couldn't help but smile wistfully as she listened. They had each finished their respective meals during the course of the conversation, continuing to make small talk. Kurenai eventually posed the question, "So what instruments do you play?" Naruto answered, "I can play any type of guitar, any piano or keyboard, drums and most percussion instruments, the flute, the pan flute, tenor and alto saxophone, harmonica, the violin, the trumpet, horn, and trombone, those are the ones I've mastered so far." Kurenai was once again astounded. "Those are the instruments you've mastered?" Naruto simply smiled and nodded. "What I like to do is use shadow clones as my own band while I sing songs that I like." "And what kinds of songs do you like?" "I like to play most types of rock and jazz. I also like some folk and classical type easy listening." Kurenai smiled once more. "Okay, you have got to perform for me at some point." "Fair enough," replied Naruto, still unsure as to whether or not he wanted to do this for her or not. He had never actually sang or played for anyone in the village before. The rain had since stopped, and the sun was shining brightly in the early afternoon. Tsuki brought a check each for Kurenai and Naruto. Before Kurenai could take hers, Naruto spoke up, "Tsuki, I'll take both of those." Kurenai tried to object. "Naruto, you really don't have to." Naruto, however, would have none of it. "Nonsense. Being a gentleman, I am more than happy to pay for the lady in my company," he ended with a sincere smile. Kurenai simply smiled in resignation. "Very well, thank you, kind sir." "You're quite welcome, dear lady," responded Naruto, in a playful tone. Naruto paid both bills, and escorted Kurenai out of the stand. Noting that the rain had stopped, and the sun was out, warming the chill in the air somewhat, Kurenai removed Naruto's cloak from her shoulders and handed it back to him, thanking him again for covering her up. "So when should we meet and talk about this little project of yours?" asked Kurenai. Naruto thought at this for a few moments before answering, "Are you free later today?" Kurenai nodded, mildly surprised that he was prepared to do it so soon. Yes I am, actually." Naruto continued, "Do you still live at the same place?" "I haven't moved in over 10 years, if that's what you mean." "Okay. I know where you live, then. I'll come by your place at around. Is 4 okay?" "You don't have to do that, Naruto. I can just meet you at a training ground or the library or something." "That's not the problem. The issue is that all of my research is in my library at home, and it's not exactly portable, and, if nothing else, I can make us dinner after we're done. Naruto, you don't have to go to all that trouble, said Kurenai in mock annoyance. Naruto smiled knowingly and simply nodded, replying, "It's no trouble, Kurenai, remember, I like to cook just like you do." Kurenai began to open her mouth to respond, and then curtly closed it, nodding with a smile, "Okay, then. I'll see you at 4. You bet. Until then, dear lady, have a wonderful afternoon." "Thank you, kind sir. I will be sure to," she said with an exaggerated yet genuine smile as she walked away, waving goodbye. Naruto noticed that her step had quite a bit more spring to it before he left to prepare his notes so that he could show Kurenai exactly what he had come up with so far. As he was walking home, he continued to ponder her chakra control, reserve balance problem, and the answer suddenly hit him. Smiling to himself, he would be sure to ask Kurenai a few questions about it later to confirm his theory after he brought her to his home. As Kurenai walked home, she unconsciously wore a wistful smile on her face as she strolled at a leisurely pace. She couldn't help but reflect on her encounter with the young blonde who had completely transformed her mood in such a short amount of time. Wow, I don't know what to make of this. Naruto was able to get me to completely drop my guard with just a look and a smile, even Asuma couldn't do that. Whenever he looked at me, he looked me in the eyes. It's been a while since a man actually treated me like a person with feelings. I'm supposed to be more observant to subtleties than most, so how did I miss all of this about Naruto? A lot of things really kind of make sense, now that I think about it. His fights against Kiba and Neji in the Chunin exams all those years ago, the way he was able to help Yakumo, and the way he believed in me as teammate sensei. Even the way he was able to defeat pain, in spite of being the ninja that all of us kind of looked down our noses at, he still somehow managed to become far stronger than all of us, and it never occurred to me to try to get to know him before now. Kurenai found herself feeling a sense of resolve that she hadn't felt since the days of her old genin team when she was determined to make them into the best ninja they could be. As her thoughts began to take a different direction, "Well, I'm going to get to know the man that has thoroughly intrigued me today. I wonder just how many of his comrades have really taken the time to get to know the real Naruto." She continued strolling along, the dreamy, wistful smile never having left her face, her body walking on autopilot as she daydreamed like a schoolgirl about future encounters and conversations with the Namikaze clan head. She was brought out of her daydreaming by a familiar feminine voice to her left calling her name. As she stopped and blinked to collect her thoughts and her bearings, she turned her head in the direction of the voice to see Ino standing in the door of the Yamanaka flower shop. She hadn't even realized that she had walked in this direction. She smiled again as Ino walked towards her. When Ino got close, she stopped and asked with some concern, "So, did everything go okay?" Kurenai nodded with a genuine smile. "Yes, Ino, everything went fine. Thanks again for the discount on the flowers." Ino smiled in response, "It's no problem at all. I miss him, too." Kurenai's smile became a little sadder, but it never left her face. "Yeah, but that's over for now, so let's enjoy the rest of the day, shall we? She asked, with a brighter smile as she finished. Ino frowned in thought, raising an eyebrow in bemusement, which was evident in her tone. Kurenai, you do seem a little happier than usual, she said, leaving an open door, hoping to bait Kurenai into sharing why she seemed to be acting a bit out of character at the moment. Kurenai, still feeling rather wistful, didn't seem to notice this, and began to take the bait. She said, looking up and around with that same wistful smile and glazed over look in her eyes. I guess you're right, I do feel happier than I've felt in a while, as she turned her gaze back to Ino. Ino narrowed her eyes suspiciously at Kurenai, causing her to raise a confused eyebrow. Ino grabbed Kurenai's wrist and pulled her into the shop, towards the back. When she had dragged Kurenai back far enough to be able to have a private conversation, she let go of Kurenai's wrist, turned to face her, and with narrowed eyes and a sly grin on her face, she said, "Okay, spill." Huh? Asked Kurenai, genuinely confused. Ino continued, "Who is he?" This only seemed to confuse Kurenai even more. Who is, who? Ino, of course, would not be deterred. Rolling her eyes, she responded, "Kurenai, you came into the shop earlier sad and depressed, the same way that you come in every year on this day. I find you only a few hours later, and you look like you're walking on air, so if I didn't know any better, and I don't, I would assume that you've become rather infatuated with someone between then and now. So, spill." Ino finished in a mock forceful tone with a raised eyebrow and a bemused smile. Kurenai frowned in thought at this, trying to collect her thoughts. Am I really that easy to read right now? I'm certainly intrigued by Naruto, but would I go so far as to say I'm becoming infatuated with him? I know that I could certainly do worse, but, still, I haven't even had time to think about my feelings, they've just started. I don't really know how I feel right now, and with this, she turned her attention back to Ino's intense gaze. I'll need to handle this delicately. Kurenai turned to Ino with a smile and responded, "Ino, I won't tell you who he is," and which Ino interrupted, while pointing at Kurenai with a knowing grin, "Ha! I was right." Kurenai nodded as she continued, "I don't even know how I feel yet because I don't really know him that well. I haven't had the chance to really even think about my feelings because I only started feeling this way a few minutes ago, but if anything does develop, I will make sure to let you know." Does that sound good? Ino gave a knowing grin, nodding at the older Junin. Kurenai smiled at Ino before taking her leave of the girl, letting her know that she had some things that she needed to take care of. Ino couldn't stop grinning excitedly about the possibility of Kurenai getting a new man, and her curiosity was growing by the second. Of course, working in I&T taught her many things, first and foremost among them being patience. She knew she would find out, or dig it out, soon enough. It was a little after 2 in the afternoon when Kurenai arrived at her home. She spent the rest of the afternoon freshening up after having gotten doused in the rain earlier. Even though she was dry, her hair was still a bit of a mess, and she had also found that some of her makeup had run. Feeling rather embarrassed at her current appearance, and rather grateful that Naruto had the presence of mind to not draw any attention to it, she decided to draw a bath and wash up. As she was bathing herself, paying close attention to her hair, she began to hum a happy tune to herself, smiling wistfully once more as she looked forward to when Naruto would come and get her. She started to realize that she was actually getting excited at the fact that she would be eating dinner with him, at his home, no less. It was a little before 3 o'clock by the time Kurenai had finished cleaning herself up and getting dressed again. After taking a few minutes to reapply her normal makeup, she decided to read Murder in the Hidden Mist, in order to get her mind off of her excitement at her upcoming appointment with Naruto. She walked into her living room, curled up onto her plush purple velvet love seat, opened her novel to the bookmarked page, and began to read. Naruto was leaping across the rooftops so that he could quickly get back to his home in order to prepare his research for his brainstorming session with Kurenai. As he arrived at his home, he quickly opened the front gate and entered the grounds of his estate. Entering the main house, he quickly made his way to the stairs descending into the first-level basement, more specifically, his lab workshop, as he had dubbed it. This room was, in reality, a room that branched off from his main library, which was quite extensive. The workroom itself was actually a decent-sized room, with a sizable desk, 2 long tables that he used as workbenches, all of which were a few feet away from the walls, as each of the 4 walls in the room had 2 8 feet by 20 feet whiteboards mounted on it, the room's single door in the middle of 2 of the whiteboards being the only feature distinguishing that wall from the other 3. The whiteboards, fortunately, didn't need too much organizing, as Naruto kept the details on them in good topical or sequential order. The scrolls and other documents containing the rest of his notes, however, needed to be not only organized, but separated from the documents and scrolls that were being used for several other projects of his as well. He created 5 shadow clones, and with them, he started sifting through all of the documentation and paper, separating each document into piles by project. Once he had all of his papers organized, the clones took the other scrolls and placed them out of the way underneath the workbenches, while Naruto himself brought the project he wanted to discuss with Kurenai over to his desk. Satisfied with the simple preparations that he had made, he went back into the main living areas of the house, making his way to the second floor and into his bedroom. Once inside his room, he took off his sage cloak and his Junin vest, but elected to keep his headband on. As he looked at his alarm clock, he realized that the time was now 3:45. He quickly ran out of his room, back down to the first floor of the house, and ran out the front door. His front gate was still up, and Naruto unconsciously went through the hand seal sequence that would reseal his property as he exited the grounds and made his way across the rooftops once more, this time to Kurenai's apartment complex. He heard the occasional squeal of a fangirl in the streets below. Shuddering, he decided that they were going to take the rooftops back to his house as well to avoid being mobbed mid-trip. It only took Naruto about 5 minutes to arrive at Kurenai's front door. Even though he was still almost 10 minutes early, he decided to knock anyway. He heard a muffled cry of, "Just a second," from the other side of the door, in a voice that he recognized as Kurenai's own. A few seconds later, the front door opened, revealing a Kurenai that was much more refreshed than when Naruto had last seen her. Naruto smiled as he greeted her. "Hey, there. Hello, Kurenai greeted him in kind as she smiled in response, drawing out the second syllable in a friendly manner. Naruto continued, I know I'm a little early, do you need a few minutes? Kurenai shook her head, not at all, and you get points in my book for being so prompt. I was just reading a book while waiting for you. Well, okay then, Naruto said as he stepped back, extending his left arm out to the side in a gesture indicating that he would like her to follow him. Shall we? Kurenai smiled in response. Let's, she said, as she exited her apartment, closing and locking the front door before walking beside Naruto as they left her apartment complex, Naruto leading her in the direction of his home. Naruto set a comfortable rooftop pace for Kurenai to follow him. Kurenai had never realized just how bad Naruto's fangirl problem was until she heard the squeals in the streets below. Even Sasuke didn't have it this bad. In fact, the only person I can remember having this kind of problem was the fourth Hokage. Well, Naruto is his son, so I guess on one hand, it's really not surprising, but still, seeing it from this end, she gave an involuntary shudder in sympathy for Naruto as that thought trailed off. After about 10 minutes of travel, Kurenai had followed Naruto to what was the old Uchiha district before the village reclaimed the land and began to sell it off. He led her to a 20-foot-high wall. A single vaulted archway housed a black slab of cast iron that appeared to serve as the front gate. Kurenai watched as Naruto placed his hand on the red Uzumaki spiral that was surrounded in yellowish-orange flames in the exact center of the metal slab and channeled chakra into it. Naruto removed his hand as the emblem began to glow, after which a metallic groan was heard as the slab began to lift itself, allowing the pair entrance to the property within. Kurenai followed Naruto as he entered the grounds. The first thing she noticed was the sudden increase in temperature upon entering the gate. The temperature had gone from a wintry cold to what one would associate to the mild cool of mid-spring. It wasn't hot, but it was definitely quite comfortable, almost the perfect weather in which to train. She glanced back as her ears caught the whining of the gate as it lowered, ending with a loud thud as it touched down. Bringing her gaze back to the front, she began to drink in some of the details of Naruto's property. The inside of the property walls were the first thing she noticed. Solid brick and mortar, but what really caught her attention were the seals that were painted all over them, the purposes of which she could only begin to guess. The courtyard itself was well landscaped with a 12-foot wide marble walkway leading towards the porch at the front of the main house, situated some 30 yards back from the gate. On either side of the walkway was one half of a well-manicured lawn with various shrubs, standalone trees and flower beds scattered sparsely throughout, though patterned in such a way as to make both sides of the front lawn symmetrical. The house itself was quite impressive to look at. Built in a Western style of wood painted white intermixed with grayish-brown stone, Kurenai guessed that this two-story mansion had to be at least 5,000 square feet, and this was just from what she could see above ground. As Naruto led her to the front door, he opened it for her as he said, "Welcome to my home, Kurenai." Kurenai smiled as she entered the open doorway. As she entered the house, her eyes started to gaze this way and that, drinking in the details of the foyer and living room she now found herself in. The floors were a mix of marble granite, most of which was covered with rugs of various sizes, shapes, colors and patterns. All of the necessities were there. Furniture such as sofas, love seats, coffee and end tables, and a full 8 to 10 person dining room set situated towards the back of the room in a sizable dining niche. There was also a coat rack a few feet off to the side of the front door, which had a few different coats and jackets on it. The walls were decorated here and there with a few paintings, the largest of which was a painting of Naruto's parents, a smiling Minato Namikaze with his arm around a grinning and rather pregnant Kushina Uzumaki Namikaze, one of Konoha's many public parks, serving as the backdrop for this warm, touching scene. The various mantel places seemed to have a few trinkets and photos on them, giving a homey feeling to the rather large room. Kurenai was reminded that Naruto did mention interior design being one of his hobbies. She was brought out of her observations by the sound of Naruto's voice. So, would you like the grand tour before we get down to business? Kurenai smiled bemusedly. Yes, I would, please. Naruto motioned for her to follow him. This way, then. Kurenai followed Naruto as he showed her his home, beginning with the current floor. The first floor contained the kitchen, which was very large, spacious and quite well equipped, the living room, the dining room, an indoor onsen built off to the side of the house with several different baths, each being large enough for about 6 people, as well as each bath having its own retractable roof if the bathers wanted an outdoor onsen, and an office study. Naruto explained to her that the office on this floor was one of several in the house, and this particular one served the purpose of keeping his records and allowing him to handle his life money matters, as he called them. Kurenai couldn't imagine why he would need a 15 feet by 20 feet room filled with furnishings and filing cabinets simply to handle life money matters. Of course, given the size of the house and property that Naruto owned, she could pretty well guess that he was fairly affluent. The rest of the first floor was just a few bathrooms, rooms primarily used for storage, or had not yet been given purposes by Naruto. Naruto proceeded to lead her to the second floor, which housed several guest bedrooms and corresponding bathrooms, as well as the master bedroom, bathroom suite, the ornateness of which astounded Kurenai. The floor of this room was covered in what appeared to be carpeting made of various animal furs. The walls were painted on a soft medium tan, accompanied by soft lighting, giving the room an alluring, almost romantic air, as though this would be Naruto's little piece of heaven on earth. The dressers with their accompanying vanity mirrors and nightstands were all made of or framed in solid oak, which Naruto had explained had come from the richer parts of the Land of Fire's forests. The bed, she noticed, was also quite large, easily capable of fitting several people comfortably, having an oval shape, and covered in crimson silk sheets and high-quality comforters, matching the crimson velvet drapes which outlined the windows, and were currently drawn back to let the day's natural light bathe the room. After seeing all of this, Naruto led her towards the walk-in closet, and allowed her to look inside it. Though quite spacious, she noted that most of it was empty, as it had been built for 2 rather than 1. Seeing that there wasn't much else to look at in the closet, she turned her attention to the master bath. The size of the bathroom, as well as the magnificence of the fixtures, caused Kurenai to gasp in awe. Inside the bathroom was a stand-up shower big enough for 2, with an outcropping allowing for the occupants to sit while showering. There were also several water jets on the walls, allowing for shower massage in addition to the main shower head. There was also a bathtub that was large enough for 2 occupants, complete with whirlpool jets to turn the bathtub into a jacuzzi. On the wall opposite the shower stall and bathtub, were the toilet, the seat of which appeared to be quite comfortable, but other than that, was largely without any features of particular notice, and 2 separate his and hers sinks with corresponding vanities and medicine cabinets, all surfaced with polished marble. The floors and walls were covered in lavish tile, patterned in a mixture of pearl white, sky blue and lime green. Naruto led Kurenai out of the master bathroom once he saw that she was starting to drool. He led her out to the balcony of the master suite, pointing out the grounds on the sides of the house and in the back, all of which was visible from the balcony. He pointed her to the training dojo that he had set up about 50 yards or so back from the house and off to the right, and gave her a rundown on the facilities and equipment that could be found inside the structure. He also pointed out the sizable shed where he kept his gardening and landscaping supplies, as well as a workshop where he planned a lot of his personal construction projects, as well as where he kept his forge for his blacksmithing. Off towards the very back of the property was a lakeside shore with its own pier. After he was done pointing out the grounds to her, he led her back into the house and back downstairs, where he showed her that, even though he had stairs that enabled ascent and descent into the basements, she wasn't sure she heard that right at first. Naruto had created and installed a seal array that acted as a teleporter between a corresponding seal array on each level of the house. He led her onto the seal array on the main floor, and teleported her to the second-level basement, explaining to her that they would finish the tour on the first-level basement, as that would be the area where they would be working. On one side of the second basement level was a control center, of sorts, where Naruto would be able to monitor the condition of the seals that powered and controlled the house and grounds, as well as use certain master control and override seals should the need arise to do things such as lock down the house, or shut down any seals that might become compromised or damaged, somehow, regardless of how small the chance might be. On the other side was a musical studio, complete with more instruments than Kurenai could count, and some that she couldn't even identify. On top of this, it was set up with a full array of professional quality auditory equipment, microphones, speakers, amplifiers, soundboards, all connected in a complex web of wires, and even a recording and direction booth. It was quite extensive. Kurenai was amazed by the vastness of it all. Even Naruto's informing her of his mastery of various instruments could not prepare Kurenai for what she was currently seeing. Naruto brought her out of her daze as he led her to the seal in order to come to the final stop on the tour, the first-level basement directly above them. This level consisted of a library, which was quite vast, seeming to rival the village's main library, if not in size, then certainly in the amount and depth of content and subject matter that it contained. Though the Konoha library contained subject matter on almost any topic one might wish to peruse, whether civilian or shinobi, Naruto's was much more specialized. It only contained subject matter pertaining to topics that were of interest to him, such as various works on ninjutsu, taijutsu, kenjutsu, and even some works on genjutsu, but it was the magnitude of the content that caught Kurenai's attention. In addition to these topics, There were various other volumes on any range of topics from strategy to politics to blacksmithing and any related topics to these fields of endeavor. Naruto even had a few medical texts in his library. What had surprised Kurenai even more than the amount of content that she could see, was that Naruto had told her that there was even more that wasn't visible at the moment. Naruto made very good use of storage seals, using them to create a complex indexing system where he could search for any specific scroll or book that he wanted, and willing that particular book to appear, in spite of the fact that there were tens of thousands of volumes stored in this system. Naruto had used one of his own Fuinjutsu creations, a preservation seal, to supplement the storage indexing seal array, which would keep it as fresh as the day he applied it, as well as preserving any additions he would need to make to it, though he would need to deactivate the preservation seal first and then reactivate it once he finished the modifications. As he finished showing her around the library, he brought her into the room where they would be discussing what he had brought her over to discuss. As he showed her into the lab workshop area, he created a shadow clone instructing him to bring them a tray of drinks and then get started on dinner. The clone gave a smart two-fingered salute before disappearing in a yellow flash. Naruto turned his attention to his guest once again, who was looking around the room, specifically at the level of detailed information that were on the massive whiteboards adorning all of the walls. "What do you think?" asked Naruto, bringing her out of her awestruck daze once again. Well," Kurenai started, before collecting herself and continuing, "I don't really know what to think." Naruto smiled in understanding as he continued, "Well, if you'll come to this board over here," he said as he led her to the whiteboard that was on the left wall in the back of the room. "These are a good portion of the notes that I have on the project I was telling you about." He turned his attention back to her. "You see, because of the size of my chakra reserves, I'll never have the level of control needed to cast even the smallest genjutsu, so I decided to focus my efforts in this particular art to finding ways to counter them. I figure that even if I can't cast them, I can at least make every effort to make sure that I can't be overcome by them. So, as you can see, I started studying genjutsu theory with that particular premise in mind." Kurenai nodded as Naruto led her to his desk, showing her the various documents and notes that he had compiled as part of this study. The clone that Naruto had sent to the kitchen had brought back a pitcher of ice water with 2 glasses. Naruto thanked his clone before the clone flashed out again to continue preparing dinner. Naruto continued to explain to her that his study included the workings of the chakra system, learning how to discover the feel of one's own chakra, which led to him actually developing certain methods of directly controlling his own inner chakra flow, and even detecting foreign chakra the moment it invades his body, as each person's chakra signature is as unique as their fingerprint or their retinal pattern. Kurenai immediately saw the genius of this particular approach to countering genjutsu. If this project yielded fruit, Naruto could very well have created a sub-discipline of genjutsu that could save countless lives of genjutsu-deficient shinobi on the battlefield. Naruto explained to her that he still needed to create a few test case scenarios so that he could run some clinical trials on what he had found. Kurenai, understanding the field of genjutsu better than anyone else in the village, could be instrumental in creating a comprehensive set of test cases to run through, which she found herself to be very excited about doing. They spent some time outlining the specifics of the trials that would need to be run, from the starting conditions to the ending conditions, as well as the expected results of each method that Naruto had outlined in his study, and specifics on how to quantify the results of each trial. Kurenai grew more and more excited about the day when they could present this to the Hokage for introduction into the academy, or even for trials in the field under much more erratic conditions. After a couple of hours, they had finished creating the basics of their test plan. Naruto would fill in the blanks and the rest of the details to have a complete set of clinical trials ready to run in a week's time. It was at this point that Naruto remembered about Kurenai's little plateau. "Oh, Kurenai?" asked Naruto, waiting as Kurenai turned her gaze to him. "I have an idea as to what might be causing your chakra plateau." Kurenai looked at him expectantly as he paused briefly before continuing. "How are your ninjutsu and your taijutsu?" She answered him honestly in a tone that belied no feelings or opinion on the matter in one direction or another. "Both are quite lacking, to be honest. If it wasn't for the fact that I'm better at genjutsu than even the 5 Kages are, I'd only be a special Junin, and not an elite one. I'd say that with the ninjutsu that I do know, I have Junin level mastery of them, but I only really know the substitution, the transformation, the clone and the teleportation. My taijutsu is the academy style with a few things of thrown in, but I'd say that I can fight with that at solid Chunin level." Naruto nodded knowingly before giving her his analysis of her problem. "I think your problem lies in the fact that you have so few ninjutsu, as well as being lacking in taijutsu. Most Junin have the ability to manipulate their chakra into at least 2 elements. And from what you told me about the chakra control exercises that you know, there are 2 vital types of chakra control exercise that you're missing. One is change in chakra shape, such as what Tsunade's puppeteers do with their chakra strings, and the other is change in chakra nature, which is how we make our elemental ninjutsu more effective, and also how medical ninjas turn their chakra into medical chakra. Let's take the second Hokage's infinite darkness jutsu. It requires both great control and some pretty good size reserves, both of which you're finding to be beyond your current level, right?" Kurenai nodded in response, paying rapt attention to his explanation. Naruto continued, "Well, one thing you'll remember about Tobirama Senju was that not only did he have very formidable skills in genjutsu, but his main strength was his control over water-based ninjutsu, specifically, both his ability to change the chakra's shape into streams, waves, walls, etc., and also his chakra's nature, from normal chakra into water-based chakra, both of which added to the degree of control he had over his own chakra. On top of that, he was also able to use space-time ninjutsu almost to the level that my father could, and his physical battle prowess was on Might Guy's level if not beyond it. Being able to add precise amounts of chakra to his blows and his weapons also did a great deal to build both his control and his reserves. It was all of these different ways of controlling chakra that he employed that, combined together, gave him the overall degree of control required to use genjutsu as effectively as he could." Kurenai frowned in both thought and mild frustration at this. She could somehow sense in her gut that what he was saying was spot on, but she was also mildly frustrated that it wasn't until now that she had become aware of the problem. Deciding that continued frustration would serve no purpose, she nodded in acceptance of Naruto's analysis. So, I now know my problem. Do you have any ideas as to how I can fix it? She asked in honest curiosity. Actually, yes, replied Naruto, currently seeing several steps that she could take in correcting her problem. I think the first two things we'll need to do are to train your body and your physical battle skills, using chakra to enhance them at the same time, and also help you with training change in chakra nature. Do you know what your primary elemental affinity is? Fire is my main element, responded Kurenai. Okay, we can start there. Do you know the shadow clone jutsu? No, I don't. Well, all you need to do is create this hand sign. He showed her the cross-fingered hand sign for the shadow clone jutsu, and pump as much chakra as you can into it. Since you already have Junin level reserves, you won't have to worry about chakra exhaustion on your first attempt. Kurenai placed her fingers together as Naruto had demonstrated, molded as much chakra as she could, and shouted, "Shadow Clone Jutsu." To both their surprise, 15 clones of Kurenai came into existence. Naruto looked at the original to see that she was panting slightly. In a tone showing how impressed he was, he said, "Very good, to get it on your very first try like that. It says a lot about the chakra control you have already, and it looks like this is about your safe limit at the moment. Remember what I said about shadow clones sending their experiences back to the user. What you're going to do is create about 5 shadow clones at a time right now, and use them to train your fire manipulation, while we train your body and give you more options with armed and unarmed combat, while also working on adding chakra to your physical combat skills." Kurenai smiled, somewhat tiredly at this, as she nodded, thankful that Naruto would take the time to help her as she would to help him. Naruto told her to go ahead and dispel her clones, as since they hadn't taken the time to learn or do anything, she could safely dispel them without a backlash. She did so, feeling some of her chakra returning to her. As she dispelled them, Naruto's clone came back in to inform them that dinner was ready. Naruto nodded in thanks, at which the clone dispelled, giving Naruto its memories of preparing some broiled fish and rice with a vegetable stir-fry, as well as some octopus with wasabi, and 2 chocolate parfaits for dessert. Naruto smiled at this, knowing Kurenai would be delighted at tonight's meal. Before heading up to dinner, however, Naruto took the time to work out a rough training schedule for him and Kurenai over the next week before they would be adding the clinical trials for Genjutsu countering into the mix, which only took a few minutes. After this was done, Naruto motioned to her as he said, "Well, are you ready for dinner?" She smiled and nodded, "Yes, I am. I'm actually quite hungry." "Well, then let's go eat," he responded with a smile as he led her to the teleportation seal and brought her back to the main level. Once they got to the main level, the smells of delectably prepared dishes flooded their senses, causing their mouths to water. Naruto led Kurenai to the dining room table and pulled a chair out for her, allowing her to sit down. As Kurenai looked at the spread, she gasped audibly and grinned from ear to ear as she noticed her favorite dish among them. She allowed Naruto to prepare her plate, which included a portion of every dish at the table. As he put it down in front of her, He also poured her a small glass of vanilla-flavored vodka, causing her to smile even more. Naruto, thank you so much. You didn't have to do all this, she responded in a tone that once again belied her gratitude. Naruto simply chuckled and smiled. Hey, it's no problem at all. I'm glad to do something like this for you. After Naruto quickly prepared his own plate, he took the seat to Kurenai's immediate right at the round dining room table. They both gave a quick blessing and began to savor the meal before them, Kurenai at times closing her eyes and moaning at the overload of sensations that her taste buds were currently experiencing. Naruto, this is wonderful. Well, thank you. I'm glad you think so. As the chef never gets tired of compliments to his cooking, he responded jovially, enjoying both his meal and the opportunity that he was taking advantage of to entertain a first-time visitor to his home. As they ate, they began to talk, getting to know each other more. They would share stories about some of their more notable missions, whether notable meant embarrassing, such as a few of Naruto's escapades while on his training trip with Jiraiya, or Kurenai's attempts at staying sane on some missions that involved Kiba, or life-defining, such as Naruto's mission to Wave, guarding Tsunade, where a rogue ninja, known for being a bloodthirsty killer, became one of the men who would play a key role in molding Naruto into who he was today, or Kurenai's teaching of Yakumo Kurama before she had to seal her ID monster. After a while, as they were eating dessert, Kurenai, seeing all of the seals throughout Naruto's house, decided to indulge her curiosity. So Naruto, the seals that you have throughout the property, here, what do they all do? She asked, in a tone that showed her piqued interest in an art of which she had only rudimentary knowledge. Well, Naruto began, they do all kinds of things. The ones you saw on the wall outside, for example, have several functions. They reinforce the strength of the wall, enabling it to withstand all kinds of attacks by dispersing the force applied to a single spot and redistributing it throughout the wall, rendering both physical attacks and ninjutsu-based attacks against it ineffective. They also prevent anyone from being able to use chakra to stick to it, so that nobody can run up the wall and climb over the top of it. But, even if they were to somehow get to the top of the wall, there are perimeter seals lined all along the top that would force any intruder that tried to cross the perimeter back out. The seal you saw on the gate is a locking mechanism that only recognizes the chakra signatures that I permit to be programmed into it. These systems allow me to completely control who can enter and who can't, making it the single, most secure structure in Konoha. Kurenai's eyes widened in surprise at this revelation. Even with her own knowledge of sealing, however fundamental it might be, she didn't realize that the kinds of things that Naruto had done with just his front gate and perimeter wall could be done at all, and certainly not with the precision that Naruto had explained to have done it with. Naruto continued, there are also some environmental control seals that I can use to regulate all kinds of environmental factors on the property: temperature, humidity, wind speed, precipitation, you name it. Kurenai's amazement at what Naruto could do using seals grew as Naruto continued to explain. Now in the house, I've created several different other types of systems. He pointed to some of his appliances that were in sight of the table, and to several spots on the walls. You notice these seals, here? Kurenai nodded. listening intently as Naruto continued, "Well, instead of power drawn from the village's generators, I actually installed a complex system of seal arrays that enable the collection of nature energy out of the air, similar to when I gather nature energy to enter Sage mode, and convert it into either normal chakra, or electricity, which provides power to the house and all of the other facilities on the grounds, as well as keeping the seals on the perimeter wall powered up. As they are always on, they need a power source to draw from." Kurenai's amazement could not be any more pronounced than it currently was. So many questions entered her mind about this obscure ninja art that Naruto had somehow taken to mastering, but as they were going as fast as they were coming, she decided to voice the ones that mattered to her the most. "So, is there more that you can do with Fuinjutsu?" Naruto responded with some enthusiasm, "Oh, believe me, what I've told you, it's just the tip of the iceberg. You can do just about anything with seals. Fuinjutsu is far and away the most versatile, most flexible, and most dangerous ninja art out there. It can do anything that any other ninja art can do, even taijutsu and kenjutsu." Kurenai raised her eyebrows in surprise at this, "and it can do an infinite number of things that none of the others can do. As powerful as I am now, the only type of opponent I'd ever fear facing would be another Sealmaster." Kurenai simply sat there in shock, reflecting on what Naruto had just admitted to her. Naruto's respect for Fuinjutsu as a leading authority on the subject was not lost on her, and the idea that he would fear facing another Sealmaster in battle, when he had faced down and beaten opponents such as Pain and Madara Uchiha, without fear, gave her a whole new level of respect and fear for the art, while also piquing her curiosity and interest in learning more. In the back of her mind, she started mulling over the idea of asking Naruto to take her on as an apprentice so that she might learn more of this art than she currently knew, which admittedly wasn't much. Naruto continued after a brief pause, breaking her out of her musings once more. "Oh, one point of interest is that I was able to create a method to counter the caged bird seal of the Hyuga branch family." "Really?" asked Kurenai with surprised curiosity. "I know that Hinata always wanted to abolish the caged bird seal." Naruto's eyes seemed to darken when she mentioned Hinata's name, which did not go unnoticed by Kurenai. Kurenai narrowed her eyes at this, a thoughtful frown adorning her soft features. "Oh, I'm sorry, Naruto." Naruto gave a weak, understanding smile. "No, that's okay. It's not your problem, it's mine." Kurenai's frown deepened at his response. She took a moment to study him, looking into his eyes. She was surprised at how much they revealed to her. The same pain, isolation and loneliness that she had seen in a young, undersized genin with Naruto's face several years ago, but there was something different about it this time. It might have just been her experience with these same feelings in the last 4 years or so, but for the first time, she was about to understand and empathize with him. In a moment of boldness, she decided to ask the uncomfortable question, "Do you need to talk about this, Naruto?" Naruto brought his gaze up to her, actually meeting her eyes. Looking into them, he realized that behind those mesmerizing ruby orbs was a woman who seemed to really know how he felt. He had caught the word need, as opposed to the word want, in her question. He could tell that she knew he didn't necessarily want to talk about it, but he truly did feel the need to. He hadn't talked about this with anyone except Hiashi, and that was only because Hiashi brought it up with him in order to persuade him to try to fix the issue. Naruto sighed. Yeah, I think I do, he began as he took a breath to compose his thoughts, trying to determine where exactly to begin. Hinata's been a particular sore spot for me ever since the war. He frowned before continuing, Kurenai simply waiting quietly for him to continue at his own pace, giving him her undivided attention. He finished collecting his thoughts and proceeded, I just can't help but wonder how someone so warm and caring could become as cold and as heartless as she has. When we started our relationship, even though we were in a war zone where anything could happen, we were happy at first. As she started to change, it hurt me so much. I was watching it happen, and I couldn't do anything to stop it, and Kami only knows, I tried. I know she wasn't well respected in camp. Even Hiashi and Hanabi didn't treat her with any respect as a comrade, and it finally just got to be too much for her, you know. Kurenai nodded, her face having saddened at the question. Like Naruto, she had also tried to turn her from that path, ironically pointing to Naruto as the example to follow. Hinata, however, for the first time, when looking at Naruto, instead of being inspired, lost faith, believing that she would never have his strength. She had finally been overwhelmed and broken by the coldness and seeming hatred directed at her from her supposed comrades in the camp, as well as from her own family. What entered her heart afterwards was frightening, and became the cause of nightmares for many. Naruto continued, I tried to encourage her, let her know that I was there for her. It was like, I don't know, like she just decided to allow herself a little taste of hatred, and when she did, it was like she just enjoyed the feeling, she just seemed to exult in it, and she even became proud of it after a while. It was almost like watching Sasuke all over again. It's actually what caused our relationship to end, and she just got worse from there. Kurenai, knowing exactly what Naruto was talking about, took a moment to interrupt his thoughts. You know, I saw the same thing you did. I loved her like a daughter. The truth is that I still do, but her growing coldness and hatred just made having any kind of loving and positive relationship with her impossible. She and I don't talk anymore, either, for the very same reason, and I was so angry with her after I heard about what she did to Hanabi. Naruto closed his eyes and nodded sadly, remembering the first time Konohamaru brought his new fiancée over to his home, in the wheelchair that she had to spend most of her time confined to. It was Konohamaru who had told him that Hanabi had suffered her injuries at Hinata's hands. Hanabi could not walk now without the assistance of either a walker or someone she could lean against for support, and even then, she could only do it for short periods of time before vertigo and dizziness would get the better of her. She could no longer mold chakra properly without severe pain, she would never be able to fight again, and these injuries were untreatable, the damage had been too extensive to repair completely. She was little more than a cripple, now, and it was painful to see. While Naruto's thoughts were occupied with Hinata's journey into darkness, Kurenai thought back once more to the times where she had tried to steer Hinata back to who she was, and the one point that seemed to stand out more than any other in her mind was Naruto's example. This brought her thoughts to the times that she had watched the tall blonde whose company she was now enjoying. She remembered watching his fight with Kiba in their first Chunin exam preliminaries, completely writing Naruto off as the loser in the fight, only to watch as, beaten, battered and bloody, he continued to stand back up, again, and again, and again. He just would not stay down, and in the end, he won the fight, shocking everyone there, except Kakashi, and strangely enough, Asuma, now that she thought about it. Even in retrospect of his victory against Kiba, she, along with almost everyone else in the stadium at the final round a month later, had written Naruto off once more as someone who didn't stand a chance, only to be proven wrong again. How many other instances could she point to? Naruto had believed in Kurenai as a sensei, at a time where Kurenai couldn't even believe in herself. Naruto was able to help Kurenai's estranged student Yakumo to overcome her own inner demon. In effect, it was Naruto who brought her and her team back together, while at the same time playing an instrumental role in healing the damaged bond between Kurenai and her first apprentice. Then, there was the fight against pain. She was indoors, sedated in the medical ward, having just miscarried her and Asuma's child due to being hit by falling debris, but she had heard about the fight, mostly from Sakura and Hinata, and listening as the rest of the village confirmed what she had been told. Naruto had defeated an opponent who had not only never lost a battle, but whom the Hokage herself could not touch. She had seen Naruto around a few times after that, but it was always in passing. Even with his random outbursts of hyperactive joy, he never looked truly happy to her, even being worshipped as a hero, the only exception being when he and Hinata first decided to become involved with each other, and even that was short-lived as Hinata's descent into hatred and callousness began. Through it all, whether he was labeled as the village pariah, the village idiot, or the village hero, he always had the same look in his eyes, the same look he had right now: pain, isolation, loneliness, at least with regards to when he was reminded of his past. But, somehow there was more. Seeing the same eyes any time she looked into a mirror in recent memory, Kurenai could see that he was still quite lonely. Naruto? Asked Kurenai, in an effort to get his attention. Naruto abruptly came out of his reflections as he blinked and turned to her. Yeah. Do you still talk with any of the Konoha 11, or your old senseis? She asked, curious yet concerned. Naruto gave a wry smile and a bittersweet chuckle at her question. It's that easy for you to see, huh? She nodded with an apologetic grimace on her face. Well, Shikamaru and I talk as often as we can. He's my best friend from the Konoha 11 right now, and he's actually been a phenomenal help to me since I got back from training with Pervy Sage. Kurenai giggled at the term of endearment that Naruto had given Jiraiya, remembering how much it used to annoy the Toad Sannin to be called that. Naruto smiled at her giggle before continuing. Did you know that it was Kakashi who came up with the shadow clone training method? Kurenai shook her head. No, I didn't realize that. Well, he came up with it specifically for me. At the time, I needed to be able to take years' worth of training and condense it into days. I had learned that I was a wind type, and Kakashi was training me in how to change the nature of my chakra into wind chakra. It would take a lot longer for me to master than most, because my ungodly huge chakra levels inhibit my control like you wouldn't believe. Naruto sighed as he knew this could drag a while if he didn't get to the point. Well, long story short, I mastered the training, and used it to create my wind style, Rasengan, and wind style, Rasenshuriken. Well, even though I was recognized as a powerful ninja, I was still considered a moron by just about everyone. While we were on the front during the war, Shikamaru requested that I be transferred under his command. He remembered some of the harebrained, on-the-fly battle plans that I would come up with when he and I were on missions together, and he had remembered Kakashi's training of my chakra nature. Shikamaru thought that if it would work with my chakra, why couldn't he apply the same method to sharpen my mind as well? Kurenai raised both eyebrows in surprise at this. So that's how it happened, she mused, remembering the glint of intelligence that she had seen in his eyes for the first time today. Needless to say, continued Naruto, in an effort to wrap his story up, after countless hours of groups of clones reading the exact same books under different environmental conditions, and after multiple games of shogi played against both Shikamaru and myself, hundreds of times over, Shikamaru began to notice that not only was I learning the things that were in all of those books more effectively, my ability to think became a lot sharper as well. Shikamaru continued training my brain this way, and he also started pulling Grandma Tsunade in to run medical scans on my brain after telling her about my training and the results. Grandma discovered that my brain was making more and more accelerated neural connections, and my IQ was also going up in leaps and bounds. Nice little side effect of this was that my chakra control got a little better, as my mental started to catch up to my physical a little bit. Kurenai asked curiously, "So what is your IQ now?" Naruto answered with just a hint of pride, "Right now, my IQ is about on par with Shikamaru's." "Wow," said Kurenai, in quiet astonishment. She hadn't realized that he had gotten that smart. Though, knowing Shikamaru the way she did, this is probably the end he had in mind when he started training Naruto's mind. If what Naruto said wasn't an exaggeration, then even Sakura's intelligence now paled in comparison to his own. Sakura, thought Kurenai, reminded of the question she had originally asked him. "So, do you still talk to anyone from the old Team Kakashi?" Sai died in the last battle of the war. Kurenai nodded sadly, remembering when they had held his funeral and carved his name onto the memorial stone. Kakashi doesn't really do the whole friends outside of work thing. We talk pretty regularly, and we even train and spar together, still, but that's about it, and if Kakashi's okay with that, so am I. Sakura, that's kind of a strange situation, he trailed off, trying to figure out how to explain his and Sakura's estrangement. How do you mean? Mused Kurenai with a curious frown. Sakura hasn't talked to me since I killed Sasuke. Kurenai seemed to immediately grow angry at this, but Naruto quickly stepped in, raising his hands to her in an effort to calm her down as he continued, "She doesn't hate me for it. She knows that I did what I had to do. And I know that she doesn't wish any ill will on me or anything like that. But the simple truth is that she loved him, traitor or not. Her avoidance of me is, mainly so that she won't say or do something that she'll regret later. She knows she shouldn't have felt the way she did, but she also knows herself well enough to know that more often than not, she thinks with her heart and not with her head. I avoid her because I don't like getting hit when she has lapses in impulse control. She'll come around when she's ready, I know she will. Kurenai seemed satisfied with this answer. After Naruto explained to her that he and the others had just sort of grown apart over the years. They had their own responsibilities with their distinctive careers and as clan heirs, where Naruto was a unique case. He was a clan head, not a clan heir, and he was Konoha's only sealmaster as well as the Toad Sage. The scope of his duties, even though he didn't go on too many missions, as well as the magnitude of his responsibilities put him in a position where he would not be able to interact with them much, if at all. This, of course, didn't help the fact that he still felt somewhat isolated. And yet, the strength of character and generosity of spirit that he displayed throughout his life never once wavered, never once did he give up, never once did he let the hurt and anguish he was feeling get the better of him. She couldn't help but wonder where his inner strength came from. The more she thought about it, the more she had to know. She began hesitantly, not sure if this was an appropriate question or not. She chose to err on the side of caution. Can I ask you a question of a personal nature? Shoot. He responded, affirmatively. Kurenai began, well, I've seen people like Sasuke and Hinata surrender to either their own inner demons, or to demons that others plagued them with, and I remember the times I've watched you over the years. I need to ask you. The tone of her voice became much more earnest as she asked, how do you find the strength to keep moving forward, and becoming a better and better man, when so many others have completely collapsed having faced far less? How are you able to keep going? Naruto adopted a thoughtful pose to this question, determining how best to answer. A smile slowly crept onto his face as he remembered her desire to hear him sing and see him perform. He looked at her with a knowing gaze as he answered, you said you wanted me to perform for you, right? Her eyes widened at this question as he continued, well, I think I know the best way to answer your question. He stood up and offered a hand to assist her out of her chair as he said, come with me. She took his hand, allowing his to assist her to a standing position before letting go of his hand and following him to the teleportation seal. Naruto transported them to the second-level basement, and led her into the recording studio. After creating a few shadow clones, who immediately started getting to work setting up instruments and connecting all of the accompanying equipment, Naruto then led her into the director's booth so that she could listen from there. Kurenai waited patiently while Naruto and his clones set up the instruments that they would be playing for the song he had in mind. 2 standard electric guitars, one for rhythm guitar and one for lead guitar, a bass guitar, a steel guitar, a keyboard programmed to sound like a grand piano, and a drum